クレアさん、アンナさん、ありがとうございます。ちょっとこれで実際にプレイアブルシティ、ブリストル、あとは、アバンアニマルズ、今年の作品がどういうことを、目指してやってるかっていうのが、お分かりいただけたかなと、思います。で、ちょっとディスカッションに行く前にですね、プレイアブルシティ東京というのをもう一回考えて、この話を聞いててもう一回考えて、みました。で、僕がすごく思ったのが、実はプレイアブルっていう視点はもうすでに日本にもあるんじゃないかと、思って、もう一度なんていうんですかね、街でもうすでに起こっていることで、いろいろ考えてみました。で、例えば流しそうめん、流しそうめんっていうのはですね、外国の方々がいるんでちょっと説明しますと、竹を半分に切ってですね、その中に、水とあとそうめんっていう麺を流して、みんなで箸を出してですね、それを掴んで食べるものなんですけど、これ視点によってはすごくプレイヤブルなものだと思うんですね。今年の夏も僕も自分でやったんですけど、うまくいかないというか、ワイワイなってなんか食べたのか食べてないのかわからないうちに終わってしまうんですが、流しそうめんみたいなものは日本の風物詩としてすでにあるものですけど、プレイ
This is something that already exists in Japanese culture. I thought that this was a very much of a playable element. And then this is Ohenro-san. There's 88 locations in the island of Shikoku where people go on a pilgrimage. And this is like a badge in English. You go around and capture the badges. And I talked with Mizoguchi-san about this. And this is indeed a kind of a game that Japan has created. This may cause a misunderstanding, but you go around different locations and you clear the goal. It's like a game. And so this is very much of a playable element, like other playable elements already that exist in Japan. And now fishing ponds. This is a fishing pond that is close to the British Council, and I take guests from overseas to this location. Now this seems very strange to people from abroad. It's an artificial pond that is created. You pay money to enter, and you enjoy fishing, and then you let the fish go after you catch it. Depending on how you think about it, it's very much of a playable element. And to change the perspective once more, there was a lot of pros and cons about this, but the idea was to create a pool in Dotonbori. Dotonbori is a very famous bridge in the city of Osaka. And the idea was to create 800 meters of a river running through there as a pool. That was the idea of Mayor Hashimoto. There was much debate about this, but the idea of creating a pool there was a very playable idea. Clare talked about using the trampoline to commute in Russia. And perhaps the idea here is that you could go and swim in the river as you go to work in the morning. Next is the Tokyo Street Field and Track event. In the Marunouchi district of Tokyo, the idea was to use the town setting for a field and track event. Now, when it comes to pole jumps, if you have a street lamp right nearby, then you can see how high an athlete is jumping over. So you have to look at the traffic laws, what to do about the security when the traffic is stopped. There was much debate about this, but this is also a very playable idea. Through the course of the discussions, I think that there'll be more playable aspects that will come up. I was talking with Clare about this, and we had Wired participate as a partner, so it's very much like a Wired concept. But what I thought was that first, the idea is to go crazy. Instead of looking at the ordinances or what laws exist, the idea was that there were various laws that prevent personal mobility from taking place, but we decided to ignore this and go crazy first, enjoy ourselves, and consider what could be possible or what could not be possible. And there are some people who've been participating for the past 5 workshops, and there'll be photos of that workshop, but there was much excitement during the course of the workshops. If you could hack streetlights, what could you do? There were a lot of ideas that were generated. And so the idea is to go crazy first. That's something necessary. And based on that, when you make something, or when you install something in the city, what is possible, what must be done to make it possible, those kind of slight adjustments could be done later on. That was the thinking, which I was able to learn much from. Another thing about playable city ideas, which impressed me greatly, was that in Bristol, the idea was to involve citizens as much as possible, to involve them in the debate as it was implemented. In the 5th workshop, on the final day, we talked with Clare and the British Council about that aspect. In regard to the participants of the workshop, their backgrounds were architects or technologists, people who make a variety of different types of sensors, or people who are pursuing the smart city concept in their corporations. There was a variety of different people. But we wanted to understand what their hobbies were like. In a city like Tokyo, there may be a visual artist working in a production company right next to you, and another person next to you may be working for a car manufacturer. So the people who are working in Tokyo tend to be, in many cases, creative people. That applies to carpenters who make houses, or the junior high school student right next to you. So there's a lot of people with a creative mind already. It may just be that their switches for creativity have not been turned on. And there are capabilities or sensibilities or creative capabilities that people may have already, and perhaps that could be drawn out through workshops and through the playable city concept. It could make cities more enjoyable by doing this. There were 5 workshops, and I'll talk about this later on. It's important, of course, to think about things, but right now, there's often a lot of text in PowerPoint presentations where ideas are exchanged. But instead of doing that, we'd like to talk about the 6 ideas and how to implement those ideas. There were 6 ideas that were generated through the course of the workshops, and this is going to be discussed further to implement. But the act of executing these ideas are very important. We have a little over an hour left, so we would like to immediately get into the panel discussion. We'd like to call Clare, and from LAX we have Anya, and we have her partner Sebastian, and from Wired Japan we have the editor-in-chief of the Japanese edition of Wired, Mr. Wakabayashi. Let us welcome him with applause. First, I'd like to ask Wakabayashi-san the following question all of a sudden. When it comes to Playable City, you've participated in the workshops, and finally, you provided us with your comments. When it comes to the Playable City thinking, what did you think about this? Well, I did participate in the workshop as an observer. If I were a participant, though, I thought about what I would be thinking about. When you're a child, you may draw pictures on the streets. I didn't do that heavily, but I did draw graffiti.
例えばそのまあ僕は別に
And I grew up in suburban areas, not the city centers. But when I think about streets, streets were where we played. And building walls, because I used to be a loner. I didn't have anyone to play catch with. So I would just throw a ball at the wall of an apartment building, for example. And there are really exciting walls and dull walls. And so there was an interaction there. And my point is this. Most probably today, as Saito-san said earlier, a park is a place to play. Streets are where people use for traffic. So the purposes, the functions are clearly defined. Whereas going forward, I think cities, I don't know about Japan, but I think there'll be more density in most of the cities and more saturated. And as that happens, the space itself will be used in diverse manner. At one instance, it might be a place for traffic, transport, but in another instance, it will be a place to play. So people in the city who live there, who work there, who just happen to be there, would have their respective desires being fulfilled. I know I'm just rambling, but I think Playable City is exactly that. The new ways of the usage of the city, more multifaceted and more complex ways of using the city. I think Playable City is a very exciting, interesting, curious experiment to explore that possibility. At the workshop, Clare mentioned several times that the new insight into the city, in other words, the streets or the place that you are familiar with because you're commuting there every day, maybe that same place could be presented in a different way so that people will have different perspectives of that exactly the same place, which I thought was very interesting. So one landscape within you may turn out to be multifaceted in your own brain, in your own mind. So if you walk around the street with a ball and throwing your ball at different walls, I think would make the streets look very different. Thank you. Claire, I have a question for you. One of the characteristics of Playable City is the convergence with technology to make streets and cities more interesting, help people make discoveries of the cities that they live in. What is the role of the technology within the context of Playable City?
So technology is a vital enabler in most of the projects that we do, whether they're for Playable City or through the other kind of funding and investment schemes we run. But I guess my interest in technology is to make it invisible and to make it magical, because so much of our lives in cities are spent with smartphones, taking photos, AR, creating barriers between ourselves and this amazing experience of the city, the smells and the people and the cinema of it. So for us, technology is an enabler to an experience. It's often a way to distribute an experience. Obviously, the projects themselves, they're not on the internet, but they're of the internet. They're found out about through social media, they're documented, they're shared by people through all of those forums. So technology kind of runs through every bit of its DNA, but if we seek to kind of make technology the primary driver for it, I think we end up in a kind of dead end.
なるほど。ということは、
I see that would mean that technology is a tool. And so you don't have to always use technology in terms of high technology or new technology to be pursued all the time. That's not what you're trying to do. Technology is a mere tool.
True. And in fact, the artists that we work with spend hours and hours discussing whether it's a tool or a material, which is kind of a meta discussion that is not for me. But yes, it's definitely an enabler of something else, and that something else is people and humans, and the kind of fragility of the human experience in the city, rather than the coldness of a building or a smartphone.
なるほど。なんか
I see. When we say technology, I'm afraid it would raise the hurdle, like my parents. Technology, no, we don't understand. And then they will do the search on the smartphone. And I said, you're using that technology. Or RFID, like Suica, the e-money, digital money card, embedded card. When Suica card was first introduced, people couldn't believe that money is really in there. But today, everyone is using it without really thinking about it. That's technology as well. So, cities and technology, when we talk about the two, we intend to think of creating new materials, new structure. We tend to get into that thought process. But there is a phrase, yokoikabe, the lateral or the horizontal deployment of the decaying technology, dying technology. I like that phrase. In other words, the existing technologies could be reused for something entirely different. So Sebastian, Anya, I have a question for you too. You have architectural background. Your company is an architectural group, and yet in Japan, I think Wired Japan held a conference recently about this subject. To express something using technology is not very common. Architects are about urban planning, buildings in Japan, whereas in your case, technology and architecture being converged, integrated. Could you explain that thought process a little?
You mean the process of implementing
Yeah,
technology into architecture,
Right.
the purpose of it, probably.
Yeah.
Well, in our case, since we are a laboratory of architectural experiments and we're a think tank that actually would like to express the technology as the new tool that can be implemented in architecture, we have a little bit opposite, let's say, approach to what Claire just said, that we, for the first glimpse, we don't want to hide the technology. We don't want to cover that. We don't want the technology to be invisible in the city. First of all, we would like to make it visible at the first glimpse, so people can actually see the benefits of it. And we believe that architecture, the matter of architecture, is a best background to introduce to people the new approaches, the new possibilities of shaping environment, and probably thinking about what the future of people might be, of the urban environment might be. So we would like to make people get used to technology and make them conscious about every aspect of technology that can be implemented in it. So we agree with Claire that technology as it is should be blurred and should be used almost unconsciously. But maybe there is also the aspect of this technology that people need to be aware of, and they need to be conscious that this technology is. So the case with your parents, they use technology, but they don't even notice that there is there.
Right.
But we believe that people should be aware of this technology and need to know how it works. So it should be all visible, because it might brought into their minds new ideas, new ways of using it somehow. So I think there are two aspects, and I wouldn't even say definitely which direction is best. We believe that in architecture, as the matter that for ages was quite constant, was static, we believe that it should be movable, it should be interactive, because we have now, in this time in our history, we have this, and we should use that. We should use that opportunity as architects to change the matter of architecture finally.
And that's the big question for us, our architects and urbanists. If we in the future are going to use these new technologies and make the world more interactive, or much not so static as it was in the traditional architecture, but be more dependence of the users, that the users are not anymore users, they are much more creators, they can create their space. So for us, what we try to research through our projects, and our main question is how to hide these technologies, and at the same time to make them visible, so the people can very easily to just know what to do with this, to discover, to use it in what way. So for sure we should still research and develop this issue of implementing new technologies.
Does it work now? Oh, sorry. And to make people be conscious how they can create their surroundings, so they need to know that they are able to shape the environment on the immediate way, so on the regular basis, and the way they go through the city, they can shape it. And our project Urbanimals was a little piece of it, that people get through the city, and the animals that were projected on the walls and floors, they were interacting with them according to their movements. So the way they behave is the way the animals behave as well. So we believe that architecture can do a similar thing, so adjust to people around.
Right.
Especially that, like in your last presentation, you emphasize that each of us has some hidden possibility to do with the space something. Each of us can create something, so we have to think about it, how to use this value of citizens.
Definitely, right. Well, just for a note, I mean, you can jump in anytime, right?
You want us to have an argument?
Well, but like what you mentioned was really interesting to me. Well, the reason why I study architecture, but I didn't go to, I didn't become the architect, was because architecture is stopped. Well, it's not really stopped, but the physically doesn't move. And then I was thinking about how we can, I mean, as our architecture, how we can do the immediate response to the economy, society, people in the building, people seeing the building, but there is no way. But right now, like, what you mentioned is really a great perspective toward like how the architecture can collaborate with the technology, right? Well, I think 俺英語しゃべるとごめんなさい。このディスカッション多分
Now, this discussion could continue for hours, but we have people with this kind of thinking involved in Playable Cities. And technology is, as Claire has mentioned, an enabler, something that enables things, a tool that allows things to happen. I think that that's an important thing. So I'd like to take the opportunity to look at the 6 ideas generated from the workshops. And so, Claire, could you explain about them? And please feel free to comment, Mr. Wakabayashi.
My slides up yet, else you'll see my desktop. Nobody likes that. Okay. Thank you. So, technology. So, we are completely thrilled to be working here in Tokyo. Partly because this city is like how we imagine the future in the UK, like the cinema, the kind of a space of science fiction, just a place that has been so evocative in UK art and cinema that working here seems really important. It also seems really important, given that cities are very many different things. They have as many differences as they do similarities, that we kind of work with people all around the world on Playable City. So we've done projects in Recife in Brazil. We're currently working in Lagos as well. And we're creating a kind of international network where we can hopefully take Japanese ideas to Bristol and Nigerian ideas to Buenos Aires and have a really interesting global communication about these things. And partly Playable City stuff is about the process. Really, it's going back to that sense of a creation net, about bringing people from different disciplines together to have a conversation. So over the last month or so, we've been running these labs here with local creatives and technologists, and really kind of engendering an open innovation approach to making work together, for kind of making through doing, by thinking together, and being as open to working on someone else's idea as making your own. And that's been, I think, received really well by the people here. And we had a really, truly excellent workshop, which has culminated in 6 ideas for Playable City Tokyo. Now, you're the first people to see these ideas. They're pretty rough, they're pretty early stage, but because we're sharing them together here today, and because we want to make them happen, I'm going to think of us as like a club now, and we're the kind of champions of these ideas. So we're going to all make sure that the artists, creatives, and technologists who are in this room who came up with these things can take this stuff forward. Because what we want to do is work here in this city running up to the Olympics to think about public space and to think about engaging creatives in different ways. So we have communication. It's very important to have a pun as a title in a project, I've always thought. And communication uses the construction workers and their batons to magically control the lighting of the city. To give the construction workers, who sometimes probably get a bit of a grumpy time, the opportunity to interact with citizens in different ways. And I'm guessing your traffic cone budget going up to the Olympics is going to be pretty high. There's going to be a lot of building work going on around here. So I think we should try and make that building work more magical. Toronimon, which is the other tower, the other Mori tower, means tiger gate. And it was in the direction of the tiger. And this project seeks to play with that notion of the tiger gate by creating a kind of tiger character that guides you around the city, that takes you to unexpected places that you might never have seen, that uses little glowing footprints, the smell of a tiger, the roar of a tiger, to make you understand that you're in Toronimon. Because although it has some very big glass buildings, it also has shrines and shops and people living there that are maybe harder to identify. So this seeks to kind of create a placemaking agenda for Toronimon that's rooted in its name. Seichi talked earlier about the rules of what you can and can't do in the city, and one of the most obvious rules is the pedestrian walk sign, stop, go. we kind of unthinkingly obey these rules. And for a person from Britain who jaywalks generally, if there's no cars, you just walk. You don't need to wait for a red light. Sometimes that seems funny. One of the good things about making these kinds of projects is actually that notion of being a stranger in a city and being surprised by a city is really useful to remember when you're making this stuff. So this seeks to surprise you at a traffic crossing by having special signs depending on the time of the day, inviting you to stretch if it's the morning, to get energized if you're on your way to work, to look at the stars if it's in the evening. And one of the themes that came from the workshop was that people in Tokyo are often looking for love. So maybe these traffic crossings could also be a kind of pick-up place to meet your future partner. Toronto Box looks to use the phone boxes of the city. There's actually loads of them around. And I think one of the reasons we don't get rid of them, even though we've got loads and loads of smartphones in our pockets, is that they may be useful in kind of natural emergencies. So we have these boxes that once you're sealed inside them can feel like intimate spaces, kind of spaces to have small conversations, perhaps to take a moment, some time out of your crazy day. So the Toronto Box series has a few different interactions. You could go in and shout if you want to let off some steam after a busy day at the office. You could be networked to someone else's laughing. I don't know if you've ever watched anybody just laugh on YouTube. The participants in the workshop did this. It's really contagious. You can't help but laugh yourself. So perhaps they're sort of network giggle boxes. And perhaps the outside of the phone box lights up on how hard you're laughing. Collaborator, another good pun. When you get in a lift, or some kind of often you get in, and everything just goes silent, and you stand there, and you don't say anything, even though you maybe see these people every day. So this tries to network you to the people you're stood with. An interactive floor maybe asks you a question. Perhaps it's kind of like, are you having a good day, yes or no? And you go over to the yes or the no side on the floor. I particularly like the fact that they wanted to add a free-falling elevator sound on the way down to mimic the idea that you might actually be about to die, which is interesting and mischievous. And finally, Mirai Mirror, Future Mirror, which blends the kind of future-facing architecture of Toranomon, those big glass steel buildings, with a kind of notion of what heritage Tokyo is. I can't say, what's that word? Daimyo?
Daimyo Gyoretsu.
That one, what he said. So that procession was like a feudal landlord procession into the city in the past. And what this project seeks to do is to kind of place you in that procession. So when you look into the mirrored buildings, you see yourself kind of in a grand historic parade. I think that's it. So remember, we're a club now. Think of ourselves as like the investors in these ideas, and we get to go out and make them happen.
Thank you, Claire. As you have just seen, and we do have some more slides, some more photos from the workshops. We had very good atmosphere, friendly, exciting, very dynamic, energized. In our workshop, the series of workshops, we have chosen Toranomon as one target area. Field work is the first thing that we did. We went outside and made discoveries. For example, phone boxes, telephone boxes. That's something that we discovered as a result of the field work. As you can see, in Toramon area, lots of construction going on, and some of the ideas were popped up because of these lots of construction work underway. So many participants said that we love field work. We want to do it again. So we had seconds and thirds. So I facilitated 3 sessions without Clare, Saturday and 2 weeknights. And of course, Toranomon looks different during the weeknights and weekends. So that's what I like to you to see as well. On the 10th and 11th of October with Clare, we went out and we had some of the original ideas being shared by everyone using the boards so that they could be carried over in the future actions. So 6 ideas that Clare just explained to us. It's not limited to one person or one time. Some of the DNAs from the participants from session 1 is there. I went through many people. For example, we talked about how it's going to feel like within the telephone box. And in the presentation, we didn't have much time. We didn't have the luxury of much time. So we used Post-its and whiteboards to share ideas. And this woman, she came up with that cone communication, Roppongi Art Nights, public solicitation is how she was chosen. That construction cone used. And she participated as an artist, the triangular cones. And we had some skits to communicate your ideas, short plays. And I think this relates to what you said, Wakabayashi and Clare. I thought that all the participants were reverted back to their childhood. Yes, true. And I think people have gotten used to ideas already. So I think people were oriented towards the same direction. That's what you find in many of the projects. Whereas this time around, I have noticed that as well. For example, some people said that the purpose is to facilitate communication. And, I think that's just something that will come at the end. Of course, you need to define the purpose. But when you think about play, that's not what play is about. So I thought there were some of the things that were explained that need not to be explained. I thought, for me, more exciting was zombie tracking on the street. And of course, there is no purpose in doing that. It was just about fun. A crazy idea, but it's fun. And I think that should be the crux of the Playable City. Let's do something crazy that might end up into something. I have a feeling that people have come so much used to problem solving, issue solving, and purpose presentation. I think Playable Cities' value, beauty, is in that, it may turn into something else, but that's something that will come afterwards. That's what play is. You just do it because it's fun. And you might get something out of it, you might not. So the purpose, I think it's better where you don't define the purpose. So in that sense, I felt frustration with some of the presentations, some of the projects.
Should we?
そう、とっても難しいこと。
I know, but then I thought it's really challenging. Think of something crazy, but that's really difficult. Most people would just recite what they saw on TV.
So I guess there's a lot of evolutionary play theorists who would disagree with you that even play that feels like it's for no purpose is actually rehearsing maybe the systems of adulthood through the notion of play, learning to collaborate, learning to share. But I kind of also take your point. And one of the things with working in cities is key performance indicators and linear notions of impact, and that kind of the notion of funding and how you do these projects, which often reduces them to so much less than you were hoping for when you set out. And I think that the notion of impact in a city is so difficult to track because you're one actor in a million people who are doing awesome things and interesting things and useful things within the city. And so I guess how Tokyo embraces this kind of ecological thinking about how we are all in a system together and that shared impact is what we want, but it will take the person throwing a ball up against a wall as well as the magical traffic cone to create a kind of different kind of culture in the city.
なるほど。でも若林さん
But Wakabayashi-san, I think you hit the bullseye in that. Hackathon, Ideathon, we have many of them, or Hackathon and Ideathon. I think many of the participants were already used to that, and I thought it was less chaotic than I had anticipated. In other words, people were well disciplined. People came up with rather feasible ideas with better feasibility. And in a way, we led the workshop in that direction. So maybe once again, we're thinking of next spring.
You can remember. Do you remember the two-headed goat postbox where the letters?
Yeah.
Not so feasible. Just
I know. Well, the street ride is not feasible, but I'm talking about like in terms of physical, like nothing floating in the air, like this, the building upside. Not that crazy. だけどその4月に今実施しよう。
Well, what I'm thinking of implementing in April is something that I'm going to be seeking cooperation on. And it may be as a phase. Once again, it'll be necessary to loosen ourselves, to broaden our perspective, or to shrink our perspective, to breathe several times, to look at the feasibility. That may be necessary. When it comes to the urban animal project, though, there was a competition. Now, Playable City was a competition in Bristol, whereas in Japan, at first, we thought that it was impossible to make it a competition. So Raizono would be willing to back up the effort in technology. And so we wanted to first start by learning what Playable City was about. But for the two of you, for a Playable City competition or to install something, were there any differences in the thinking in a good sense and in a bad sense?
Of the process or just during the realization?
Like what you thought, what you present, as an entry to the award, like you had some certain idea, but when you execute it, and you got like, something, I don't know, the people react like totally different than you expected, or, what's the gap, like the good gap or bad gap?
I can answer that very easily because the project that was executed was exactly the same how we imagined that. And the
You guys are actors.
Clare is shaking head. But honestly, in our heads, we had pretty much what was finally, let's say, made in Bristol. So we had that interactions in mind that happened in.
You forgot about the points.
The points.
You pitched a game to us, so it was like a gamified points layer.
Right. Okay, but it happened. Sorry, I've got this. Okay. I mean, in the process, it did change, but it did change in the direction that we, let's say, could control easily. So, let's say the outcome wasn't something that turned out to be different that we wanted actually. So it went in the direction that it was quite easy. I mean, it took a lot of effort of many people to bring up to life the project, but we could control that. I mean, in the matter of having the interactions we want, installing it in the places we want, making the project interact with people the way we want. Although it was a little bit different, that's true. The entry was a little bit different, but through the conversations with Watershed, with a lot of creative people in Watershed, we couldn't just stick into our first thought. It would be just not even rude, but it would be just stupid, because there were so many good ideas behind in Watershed, in the air. So we were just able to grasp that and implement into the project. And we are really, really glad that we had this opportunity, because we've learned a lot. We hope that people that interact with our project will learn a lot about the city as well.
I think the other thing that people don't talk about enough, and you know, I just showed you 20 minutes of shiny, brilliant projects that have been a great success, that everybody had loved, but making things is really hard, and making things in cities is really hard. And so we've had a really interesting journey around power and permissions and infrastructure, even in a place like Bristol, which is kind of used to us asking for slightly crazy things. It's still obviously a huge multidisciplinary effort. And I think when you do anything for the first time, it's really hard. And we kind of give these polished presentations like that's not the case.
But I'm really interested in like kind of detail level, like how you communicate with the city people or governors or, you know, people in the city to make it realize, like getting permissions or, you know.
We have a secret man called Ted who goes and digs up the road without permission, who works for the council, and he's like a renegade. Everybody needs to find the Ted in the organization you're working with, I think. But the serious answer to that is we couldn't do it if the rest of our work didn't kind of think about civic leadership and the culture of Bristol and all of the things that we do in our venue and all of the roles that we play in terms of other forms of city planning and social engagement and funding bids with the city and welcoming all of their visitors who come to Bristol and showing them our work. So all of that kind of ecology, as I say, allows us to have a quick conversation with the right person, and they trust that we're not going to make them look foolish or do anything dangerous. And so I think, for instance, the McKinsey report on the future of cities picked up a really unusual thing. They picked up that the first Friday of every month, Watershed just has open drinks for whoever wants to turn up. Don't write that on the internet, though, because I can't afford the barbell if everybody turns up. But by just having open drinks, we kind of get people from all backgrounds. We get the vice-chancellors of the universities. We also get people who work in primary schools. And the rule is anyone can come who hears about it, and anyone who's heard about it can bring a friend. And again, it's that kind of sustained support and catalyzing informal collaborations that allows the formal things to go smoothly.
なんか今の話をお伺いして、例えば
I'd like to ask about that. Now, it's completely opposite of what I was talking about previously. But in order to convince the local government or corporations to do something, you have to set objectives. Some objectives have to be set. If that's the case, you say that it's a certain thing that has certain benefits. You have to persuade people about that. But what's the logic that you apply to do that?
try very hard to not use a linear impact model of there's too much rubbish in the city and this will solve it. Because I think that way madness lies and becomes really restricting. I guess one thing is that we invest quite a lot of our own money in these projects, so we're not just looking for public funding. We go in as a partner with the government and with the local government, and that allows us a more open conversation. And I think they fund it in a placemaking agenda rather than a engagement agenda. We deliver huge amounts of profile for the city. One of the things that we spend a lot of time and money on is city branding for the projects and wrapping big billboards out there and flags so that people know about it, because otherwise they would be kind of invisible. And so I think in the UK, there's always competitions. Which is going to be the smartest city and have £10 million from the government? Who, and Bristol always comes second in every competition that we enter. We come second, which is great because it means you usually get a little bit of money, and also nobody's really watching what you're doing because they're watching the person who came first. So you can kind of take risks and do things differently. But the other thing about that is that you'll always go on second in the conferences. So when the Smart City Conference of Europe happens, Glasgow gets up and they talk about their amazing Smart City dashboard and everything that's happened. And Bristol needs a different story. They need something that feels like a USP, that feels like a way that they can talk about our approach to stuff. And so honestly, I think that's also part of the reason they work with us, is a kind of different approach to narrative.
なるほど。で、そこはやっぱりブリストルはブリストルなりのストーリー。
This means that Bristol needs a unique story of its own. How do you build up such a story, though? It's not everybody discussing together about what the narrative of Bristol is about, is it?
Actually, I mean, lots of people in the UK would say that Manchester is a city that has its story down pat. Like, everybody knows Manchester is the northern powerhouse. It's the place where everything happens. And for a long time, Bristol was seen as a place that didn't shout very loudly at all. And we just we were a bit awkward and we got on with doing things. But I think that everybody is brought into a narrative of difference, that notion of the creative and the technologists coming together, and that being backed up by years of investment by these companies in the city, is a narrative that is kind of lived, and it doesn't need a marketing or branding agency to kind of tell it to us.
面白い。いや、多分東京の
I think one of the biggest challenges for Tokyo is that I don't know if it's Tokyo metropolitan government or a government ministry, but streets or the city genius bar like Watershed. We don't have something similar to Watershed either in the metropolitan government or any of the ministries. And Urban Animals Project's message is technologists, skills, talent. When you have a bunch of people, you come up with new, exciting ideas. We don't have such exciting media centers in Japan. Wacom in Yamaguchi, the lab team that I work with very often, when we go there for some ideas, they give us good ideas. They give some very new suggestions. And another important thing, in UK, just because Watershed is successful in UK, if we try to bring it to Japan as is, I'm afraid it won't work, although we tend to make that mistake. So creative center, media center, I don't know, but the center of many different ideas like Playable Cities, something comparable to Playable City, or through the workshops, students, the architects, people within society come together. Within the workshop, Rhizomatics, our organization, I think, is trying to play the role of Watershed. I just realized that just right this minute. And I think that's what is needed in Tokyo. I don't know how to put it. You know, that sounds interesting, but what for, if you ask that question? Some people would respond if you say, well, you can make this much money. But if it's not economically feasible, very few people would respond, including the government, the administrations, bureaucrats. So how do you present those non-economic values? How do you present that? How do you define that? I think that's a very basic question, and I'm afraid no one can really frame it in the correct way. To the best of my knowledge, I think that's the challenge for Japan. When you say it makes money, it's profitable, you know, they'll say go for it. But when we say it's interesting, exciting, they'll ask, so what? And I said, you know, it could lead to something, but they say, no, that's not good enough. So how do you convince those people? See, that's what I'd like to get your idea, Claire, some insight as to how you do that.
And the good thing about bars is they're really great for cash flow, and so and they keep people coming in, and because actually our biggest funders are our audience. They're our biggest collaborators and our funders. 80% of our income comes from them. So that makes us, make sure we're very welcoming and that we're hospitable to people who we work with, but also allows us to slightly sidestep some of that economic value question because we are generating value. But I guess one of the things that sort of eludes me is the notion of triple bottom line accounting and this notion of how we show social and cultural value against economic value. And I think we all need to be better at that. I mean, we can tell stories, we can do case studies, we can roll out any number of young people whose lives have been changed by participating, working with us. We have startups. I can say that like £3.5 million of like money was generated by the startups we supported last year, and that was like on a spend of 100 grand. So our economic multiplier is better than roads, I think, on that thing. But yeah, I think we need to get to a notion of triple bottom line value and holding the societal value and cultural value as equal to financial value. And if anyone has a model for that, then that would be great.
Yeah, also, yesterday, Nicholas Negroponte pointed out quite clearly that there is a mission in everything we do, and we cannot stick to, let's say, economy and the mission altogether. It's not that easy. If you went for mission, then it's not economically feasible, probably. And how we do that in Poland, for example, we've got institutions that are for mission itself only, and any money that gets into this institutions, for example, the Association of Polish Architects that we collaborate with a lot, they are for mission. They are not profitable because they cannot produce the value, like economical value. They produce the value for people, for the space itself, and they make interventions in space that you cannot count on money for, but they get a lot of funding, and they share this funding in the way they want to do their mission the best they can. And that's as soon as any country have that kind of institution that is that people trust with, that they will spend the money correctly, then it's great.
We're a charity too, but you don't. I mean, you can still make a profit as a charity, and I think that kind of cultural entrepreneurialism is more important now. because of recession and the fact that, you know, we're facing 40% government cuts in the UK in November for art, which is a very real problem for lots and lots of arts organizations. But also, money aside, if you want to spread your vision, we believe that the better future is one that's co-produced, that has as many different people participating in its vision. And if we want to spread that, then we need access to partners and funds and kind of ways to do that. So I guess the mission is always at the heart of what we do, but some like money is necessary to get there.
Right. ちょうど4月
In April, Clare came. We had some photos. We held a conference. And I said we shouldn't seek KPI in art. But on the other hand, we need to have a supporting mechanism which would require KPIs. The cause. We need a cause or a pretext. Especially on the city level or the placemaking level, I think that would be essential. Another thing, my recent thoughts is this. The civic mindset, the will of the people are getting really wild now. Violent. Lots of redevelopment projects. Why are you laughing, Wakabayashi? I was just wondering where you're trying to go. And I thought in this environment, with this redevelopment boom, I was talking with someone involved in the redevelopment, local redevelopment. And when you want to involve the citizens for development, although that's the slogan, the perspective is already there, which means that, you know, the idea is already predefined. And when you talk to them, they actually don't know how to communicate with the general public. And for better or worse, art is used as an excuse. They say that, you know, this is art, and so we are open-minded. That's important, but just having an open door is not enough. You really need to have a collaboration. The technologists, people who can really realize the ideas, but the bureaucrats don't know how to do that.
伸びてるのにこう
So despite the fact that both sides have their hands out, it's very difficult to get them to shake hands. It's frustrating. So looking at the Watershed model or the KPIs for artists, their capability to express themselves is important and must be assured, but also there's the producer function, which seems to be working quite well in Watershed. Claire, would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, that's true. We invest in a producing team that sit in the studio and who work across all our projects. So they create themes, go out and raise money, understand the intellectual property, as well as critiquing and supporting the artists we work with. And I guess these kinds of middle people or translators or bridges or the people who can kind of hold a neutral space and give people permission to step in and play, to take risks. The producers are really vital to the kinds of work that we do, to building up that trust with the government, to helping artists find places to kind of present their projects. And it's quite new to call them producers in the UK. I guess it's a term borrowed very purposefully from the film production world, where producers kind of do a lot of different jobs around kind of money and talent and all of those things, but also from a brand agency kind of land sort of world of kind of looking after things.
Right.
そういうプロデューサーの人たちってどういうバックグラウンドの人？
What are the background of these producers, mostly?
Mostly theatre. And there's something about people who work in theatre who understand collaboration, that every person is important to get something done. That understand that nobody's too grand to sweep the stage, because sometimes the stage just needs sweeping. And also that the show sometimes just had, like, there is a point, a deadline, where the curtains are going to open and you better put something on. So that kind of sense of urgency is really important. So most of my producing team come from a theatre background. However, it's funny because when we collaborate with people from a performance or a theatre background in terms of artists, often the traditional theatre organisations are the worst people to work for, because all they're thinking about is what's on their main stage every night, and they're not so open to kind of risk or different ways of working.
なるほど。
なるほど。
なんか今ね、多分斉藤さんともよく話するけど、その
I often talk with Saito-san about this, but there are a lot of producer-like functions that are necessary in a wide variety of different jobs. And so they have to link citizens with organizations, or you have to link ideas with technology. And there are a lot of requirements in place. And there may be a certain project, whereas Clare has said, the social and cultural value as well as the economic value has to be cleanly explained. And when it comes to economic value, there are a lot of people who can talk about that, and there's people who can express that. But when it comes to the cultural or the social value of things, to explain it to people who are only interested in money is difficult. But you need to have all of these capabilities in place for everything to move forward. And I think Saito-san is the only person that is capable of doing all of that. You need someone who acts as an intermediary. There's a lot of requirements, so it's tough. But it's necessary to do things collaboratively. And in that sense, I think what Watershed is doing is something of great interest to me. And I think that it's very closely related to the creative industry that I belong to. So when it comes to the Playable City, as I've said, or rather Clare said this, you have to show things and you have to talk about the value that it generates. And if Saito-san should force this through, then we can understand about the values. I think that's the only way we can go about things. Because we have to try it out to really know for sure. But that process of discovery can be taught by people, and we hope that our platform will allow such people to participate. That would be a good thing. Well, that is inspiring to hear after 2 nights of going without sleep. I'd like to continue this discussion, but we're running out of time. So consequently, can we take a Q&A session here? Since we have these members here, please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question to any of these participants. I think we can take 1 or 2 questions. Or it could be a participant in a Playable City workshop, if any are present, who may want to comment here. Yes. Please wait for the microphone.
With the projects we showed, remember, we're the club now. We're all making this happen.
Thank you very much for the panel discussion. It was very interesting to listen to. When it comes to Playable City, I had heard about it before, but I've never participated in a workshop, so I've got a good idea today for the first time about what it's about. In regard to this kind of activity, now you're getting a lot of different people to participate, and my image of this is that for each region, for the Playable City efforts. I work at Ebisu Daikanyama in community design. And for the Ebisu Daikanyama region, I'm sure that there's a team that can think about the Playable City idea there. And I hope that still happen from here onwards, but I would like to inquire about your thoughts on this. What I think is that I hope that it should happen one after the other in different places. We did several rounds of field work to look at the potential of a certain location. What is there? It could be flowers, it could be books stacked up, or it could be pipes. But we have to do the proper research because we may think we know, but we don't really know until we really do the field research. So you get to understand the local elements. But in the area of production, to produce something, or when there's a lot of ideas that are accumulated, and something has to be done about inventory taking about the ideas. Perhaps that has to be carried out in Tokyo.
Working anywhere. Minami is our Japanese sales agent. So
他に質問
Are there any other questions? I would like to ask the people from LAX about the following. In your presentation, you mentioned that you were able to control the works completely according to the initial idea. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Because it's playable, you're involving a lot of people and doing something in the city. But for the creators, there may be some unintended consequences, which may be one attraction. And so I'd like to ask about that element. This person has participated in all 5 rounds of the Playable City workshops.
I think that what you mentioned, but sorry, I just heard myself. Yeah. Okay, so I think that your question and your point of view is very good, that we cannot design the whole spectrum, what can happen when something is interactive and when something is something different than static, what you, like the human, can interact and can change at the same time, simultaneously. So we can only design some spectrum of interactiveness, which can be just discover of your action. So in our projects, we wanted to implement this spectrum, which might be explored by participants, which in our mind, in our idea, is something good, but you will never design the exact scenario, what people should do or shouldn't do. You just have to design some open possibilities, and it only depends on the participants what they can do.
And also, our purpose was the extreme flexibility of animals and the interactions. So we wanted to control this flexibility and to be, let's say, to achieve this flexibility. And what I mentioned, that we were able to control the process, and the outcome was that flexibility that we actually achieve in the end. So people can shape interactions according to their will, actually. So in this matter, but we agree that you cannot really be in charge of everything while you produce something creative and playable in terms of how people will respond to that. That's true, and that's out of question, really.
よろしいですか。じゃあ
Thank you. Okay, maybe we'll take just one more question before we close.
The idea or concept of the playable city came from. I mean, it's totally related to the idea or functions of the producers. I mean, the idea of a concept of the playable city is accepted by whole citizens in your home country. In other words, in Tokyo or in other part of the Japan, the concept of that idea will not be totally accepted because of the different weather or different characteristics of Japan. Then that comes from the role of the producers. And producers follow the mayor's order or governor's order, or producers put some the new ideas into the citizens, and the producer give some ideas to the citizens. Which comes first and which comes second? Thank you.
Yeah, so we don't really follow government orders in the same way in the UK. So these are ideas which are catalyzed from the whole kind of slate of artist projects that I showed, the inspirations from the people that we work with, that we try to draw together and learn from, and then and codify and create this theme much more than I think the local government thought of it. But they are key partners and collaborators. And one of the great things about Bristol City Council is sometimes they tell me off if I haven't taken enough risks or done something extreme enough. So they're pretty good partners to work with. I guess on the other thing about play and Japan, I think like Saito-san showed some Playable City examples, but if you go to Harajuku and look at the cosplay people, it seems like it's not that big a leap to me from dressing in this extraordinary way in public to doing kind of quite small, quite we're not looking to make people look stupid. We're asking them to play together. Hello Lamppost, you wouldn't even actually know someone was playing it necessarily. It's much more a small thing and a shared interaction. So I don't think it will be too much for people here to engage with.
はい、お時間なので。
Thank you very much. I'm afraid it is time to close. Claire, Sebastian, Anya, Wakabayashi-san, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panelists.